Are you ready to make a coat with me? This was my third attempt, and I do think that if I can produce something vaguely wearable like this, then so can you. I did try and model this one and the previous one, which is in needle cord. My husband said that was pulling some really stupid faces, so the modelling was a little bit curtailed, but you get the idea of the coat. It's very wearable. I think if I didn't have my hands thrust in the pockets quite so much, I think it'd look a bit better. I think the first task is to remove all of this clutter off my sewing table so that I've got a nice place to cut out the fabric. So the moment has arrived. We're now going to make the coat, and I don't really want to call this a sew along because I don't know. I think that might be a bit misleading, and I think I'm going to start with a little bit of a disclaimer. So I don't have any sewing qualifications other than I make some of my own clothes, and so this is a pattern that I particularly like, and I first mentioned it in the Happy New Year video that I'll link in the description when I talked about my fabric haul that I got in Wales, and also a few patterns that I wanted to kind of make or review. So far on my YouTube channel I've only made things like bags and homewares and things like that, but I do make my own clothes. I don't make them for other people. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because I think if I can make a coat that's wearable, and you know, I do get the odd compliment about it, and people say, where did you get your coat? And I say, I made it myself and things like that. And I do enjoy a little moment of pride at that point. And I genuinely do think that if I can make it, you can. Pretty much anybody can, if you can sew at all. So as I mentioned in the Happy New Year video, I bought this piece of fabric. Sorry, I also need to, my other disclaimer is that I have no affiliation whatsoever with the avid seamstress whose pattern this is. She doesn't even know who I am or anything like that. So I'm just showing you what I've done. So I've made 3 of these, and the ones that I've just shown you now, the one with the fewest mistakes is the checkered one. That's the last one I made. So the one that I haven't shown you is the one I gave away, which was the first one I made, the orange and black one, which I thought was tan and black, but it was orange and black. And then the one I made for the wedding, which is in the needle cord, and then the checkered one, which was the most expensive fabric, and which by then I've made 3. So for instance, the pockets are okay, whereas even on the needle cord one, the pockets aren't quite right. So as I mentioned in the Happy New Year video, I got this fabric in the discount shop in Wales in my fabric haul, and it was £4.49 for 2.4 metres of fabric, which is a little bit less than it says in the pattern for my size. But my recollection of making both the checkered one and the needle cord one is that I had fabric left over, and I'm not really sure where that was, but I did. So I'm just going to try it because it was so inexpensive. If it turns out I haven't got enough material to make the coat, not only will I need to scrap this video, but it doesn't really matter because I use it for something and it wasn't expensive. Now I don't know because it's in a discount shop, I don't know what this is, but judging by the weight, I think there is quite a lot of wool in it. And in fact, the description on the receipt does say wool tweed. And if it is, then I've got an even better bargain than I thought I had. It's very heavy, so I think it might be wool, but whatever, I'm going to give it a go. So a few things to say first. If you download the pattern, and I'll put a link to that. I think I've already put a link in the Happy New Year video, but I'll I'll do another link for it. You first of all need a printer, and you need to be able to print it off on paper and join up the pieces together. That's the tedious bit. And I've made a few PDF patterns for coats, trousers, jackets, all sorts of things. And whereas I'm normally a quite impatient person, a discipline I do impose on myself with PDF patterns is one session I'll download and make the pattern. Next session I cut out the fabric, which I've already chosen, and that's a step in itself. And only then, in the next session, that could be the afternoon or the next day or in a week when you've got time, that's when I start making it. Now, I think I might have mentioned before that I've made things in the past that have gone wrong. One of the reasons why they've gone wrong is because I've rushed them, and I am naturally a very impatient person for things like that, but I've learned, maybe it's my age, to actually do this in those steps. So I'm assuming that you've already printed off your pattern and made it. So just before I finish, I'll just say a little bit about choosing fabrics. Unless you're really, really confident, I strongly urge you to buy some fabric that it's a coat you would be prepared to wear. It's not going to cost very much, and it fits the criteria of the fabrics that are suggested in the pattern, but you're going to use it to practice, and then you might wear it for a bit, like I did, and then give it to a charity shop or put it in a textile bank, which is what I did. I gave it to a charity shop. And then when you feel confident, move on to another one. That's what I did. And I probably will be making this pattern for coats for the rest of my life because I know how to do it now, and I've got the pattern. So therefore, the first step of making one, I think it's called a toile or something, but you know, where you make one. Well, when you make a toile, it's made with calico or rough cotton. You're not going to wear it, so it's not a toile, but it is a trial version. So no, that's probably not what you want to hear, but that is actually by default what I ended up doing, and I'm very, very glad I did. So let's get on with it. So I'll just go through some of the things you need. Obviously, you mainly need to follow the instructions that you've downloaded from your pattern. You'll also need your pattern, and mine's already all cut up, so it's not very tidy looking, but you need your pattern. Obviously, your fabric. Now, I'm not going to pre-wash my fabric. I think if I had spent a bit more on the fabric, I would. I'm just going to chance it, but I would normally say if the fabric is washable, pre-wash it, dry it according to the manufacturer's instructions, and also press it according to the manufacturer's instructions, because by that time it will have done most of the shrinking it's going to do. Because it's quite a loose fitting coat and I'm slightly between sizes, so the size I make is a little bit big for me. So because I make one size up, and it's quite a generous pattern. That's another thing to say about the pattern that I've found. It's quite generous in its sizing. So I have got a bit of room to play with. So I'm actually going to wing it and not wash this first. So you need your fabric. You need some pins. You will need some scissors and some kind of fabric marker. This is a chalk pen. And potentially some clips as well. And you might need a bodger. And I just use this for clipping threads. And two things which, oh sorry, did I say matching thread? And then last but not least, I always use these two things. Now you can just use scraps of paper or whatever you want, but when I've cut out my pattern pieces, I say what it is and I pin it to the pattern piece so I know which pattern pieces there are. And then this is almost the most important thing. It's a pen, an ordinary pen. And so if you're making this pattern and you're like me, you're just making your own coat, if you have downloaded this pattern and it's the first coat and you like it, you'll want to make more. But if you look at mine, it's got notes all over it, where I've made myself little notes and things. So do that. And if you read the pattern, if you read the instructions without printing them out, then get a notebook or something and make notes in it. But whatever you do make notes. So one last thing to say at this stage is here are some pinking shears, and if you don't know what they are like crocodile teeth. If you edge fabric in it, if you snip the edge of a fabric in it, it stops that piece of fabric fraying. So you'll read in the pattern where it says finish the edges, and what that means is, I'll just show you here where you've got a raw edge of fabric. This is the vertical seam going down the side of the coat. So I have overlocked that there, and that's what it means. It means finish the edge of the fabric. It's not a seam. Finish it so that you could wash this coat and it won't fray to bits. Another way of finishing it is to bind the edge, which is what I've done here with my lining fabric. So I'm going to cut this out with you today, and between now and the next session I'll make my mind up on two things. One is, am I going to try and sew the whole thing on the treadle sewing machine which I feel it's a challenge I should do, and am I going to use my overlocker, or am I going to make this as though I don't have one, to show that you don't need one, because you don't. So I'll make that decision between tonight and tomorrow. So let's get cutting out the fabric. Just showing you briefly here what's going on inside the coat. It has what's called a buggy lining, which means it just has the bodice part lined. Just showing you the inside of the checkered coat. I chose to bind the armholes there with just some fabric that I already had to neaten that edge. The rest of it is overlocked, and just to give you an idea, so instead of using a lining fabric in this one, I used the same fabric that I already had. And this is a close-up of the woolen fabric that I chose. It's very fine knit. It's like a sort of jacquard pattern, in that it's not printed on or anything. The pattern comes from the weave. It really is lovely fabric. It's terribly practical because it does pull a little bit. But you can see the pocket there. The idea is to get that smoothly in the line of the coat, which I finally achieved on the third version. And I made a covered button. It's just an ordinary coat button that I covered, and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so I've got my table completely clear now. I've got a sewing table in my sewing room, which is an improvised camping table that my husband made in the pandemic so that I could make scrubs. But nevertheless, I do have a sewing table which I can walk all the way around, which is a complete luxury, and it makes cutting out fabric so much easier. So if you can commandeer the dining table or something like that, and clear the decks to actually cut your pattern out. And I will say two things at this point. One is, if you are going to do something like make a coat, you do need to kind of put some time aside, and I think there were some guidance notes on this in the pattern as well, and I completely agree with them, which is don't try and sew this when you're tired. Don't, and if you're getting frustrated with it, stop, put it away, because you'll only ruin it and then regret it. And clear the decks and give yourself time to do this properly and enjoy the process. And then when you're following the pattern, there's a way to lay out the pattern, the pieces on your fabric, that is appropriate for the size of fabric you've got and the size you're making. So make sure you follow the right lay plan. It's called a lay plan, and that's this bit here, which is the bit that tells you where to put the fabric to get your coat cut out according to your cloth, as they say. Now, this fabric doesn't have a print on it, and it also doesn't have a direction. So the needle cord fabric that I showed you, it does have it. It's embossed, but it doesn't actually have a print on it. But it is like velvet. You know, needle cord is a little bit like velvet, and so you want to put the pieces so that they're all facing the same way, because you don't want one part of your coat where you can push the velvet or the corduroy down, and then the other side you can't. So that's why you need to really pay attention to the way you lay this out. And I'm explaining the really obvious here because I'm assuming you're like me, which is you don't really know much about sewing. If you did, you wouldn't be watching this video. So I'm sorry if I am explaining things laboriously, but this is why I'm doing it, because the aim of my videos is to encourage you to make something that you either might have made it in the past and then you don't want to do it now, or you've never tried it, and I want to encourage you. And as I've already told you, this fabric cost me less than £5, which is, I'll put the dollar equivalent, but it's nothing. Right, so it's not got a direction, and it doesn't have what they call a nap, so like, you know, velvety direction on it. So I'm a little bit more free and easy, but I am going to follow the lay plan for the 145 centimetre 57-inch wide fabric, which is this one here. So it's the right hand one on page 7. So I've laid out the first few pieces on the fabric, and isn't it nice to have a little bit of sunshine in the sewing room? Really, really welcome. So I showed you the lay plan yesterday, so if you're referring to it, it's the right hand picture on page 7, and you pick the one that's relevant to your size and the size of your fabric. So because you probably can't see that clearly, I'll just describe it. So the fold is here, and there aren't any bits of this pattern that are cut on the fold, and that would mean that you would be lining them up with the fold and then opening them out to have your piece. There aren't any bits on here that are cut like that, but that's the front side, and this coat is cut with what's called princess lines. So you've got a panel at the front, a panel going sort of under your arm, and then panels at the back. And I don't know why they're called princess lines, but it's a very flattering way of cutting, say, a dress, because the lines are vertical in the garment. So this is the bit that goes under your arm. So imagine like the panel that goes from under your arm to the hem. This is the front of the coat. Obviously you cut 2 of those because that's like the bit you button up, you know, the 2 sides. And then this piece here is called the front facing, and so that's cut in main fabric, but it's the bit that flaps open when you open the coat. So obviously that is the bit that is it's called a facing because it's made in the main fabric, but it's not outside. It's not on the outside of the garment. And I'm explaining these things because when I started trying to make my own clothes, I found all of these terms really confusing, and I kind of worked them out by trial and error. So that's why, and I'm sorry again if I'm explaining things really laboriously. Nothing to say is you'll see notches on the patterns, marked on the patterns. Make sure that you do cut those notches out, because when you've got just a piece of fabric without the piece of pattern on it to tell you what everything is, you'll need that mark to line things up. So don't skip that stage. Nothing to notice is where it tells you where the grain line is, which quite obviously is this way on the pieces. So it's so you don't cut the coat on the bias, which would mean you were cutting it, you'd lay the pattern that way, which would mean you'd be stretching the fabric all out of place. So when you cut on the grain, you keep the integrity of the fabric, and because the fibres go this way and this way, if you cut on the bias, you're cutting through all of those lengths. Therefore, that's how you get stretchy, foldy, drapey fabric. When you see a skirt that's cut on the bias, that's what that means. Again, I'm probably stating the obvious for some of you, but so pay attention to the grain lines on the pattern. So it says grain line, so then that means you're putting it straight, which is obvious, but might not be obvious. So on the pattern, it shows you how to lay it out. I've done the top 3 on the picture, so these 3 here, and then I'm going to cut them out, then slide the fabric up and cut out the rest. So one other thing to say is there's marks on the pattern, as there are on most dress and coat patterns, where you can shorten or lengthen the garment. I'm only 5'2", so I tend to, so there'll be a point where it says lengthen or shorten here. So just fold in the pattern by 1 inch. It marks where to do it. Just if you like, so it would be the equivalent of making something a petite. So for me, it'd be like making it a petite length. So that's don't skip that step. If you want to shorten or lengthen the coat, do it now. And the other thing to say is I've got these things on as weights. I've got napkin rings and staplers and all sorts of things and paperweights. Some people prefer to pin the pattern to the fabric. I don't do that. I do it like this. Or another thing you could do is you could use chalk and chalk the pattern onto the fabric, take the pattern away and then cut it out. But I do it like this, and I cut the notches out as I go. So don't cut it out and then lift the pattern off. Don't lift the pattern off until you've cut the notches in. Right, so I'm going to start cutting out now. I've cut that piece out now, and I've cut the notches, so this is the point where I'll take the pattern piece off. Now I'll put this to one side now, away from everything else, just in case I'm tempted to pick it up and use it by mistake, because I've already done that one, so I'll put that elsewhere. So that is, can you see the notches there? So that is the front. So I'll get one of my big corsage pins now. I'll get a label and I'll write it on. Didn't work very well. Front. So pin the 2 pieces together like this with the label, and then what I normally do is I drape it over the back of a chair. That way. So moving on to the next piece. So that says front side. So I've cut it out, I've cut the notches. Now I'm going to stick this on with a pin. I'm going to put my pattern piece out of the way. Because these pattern pieces can start to all look a little bit similar. I'm going to get a big fat pin, stick that in, drape that over a chair. So this is the front facing. So cut it out, cut all the notches in, and now I'm going to pin this to the two pieces. And I'll just show you the pieces that we've just cut out on the coat. Move the pattern piece out of the way. Pin those together. Put those over the chair. Right, so this is the front of the coat here. So we just cut out a pair of those there. Then we've cut out the front facing, we've cut out a pair of those there. And then the side front or front side, whichever it is this piece here. Can you see the seam there? So it's like that piece there that goes down there. So that's the first three pieces cut out. Hello sewing friends, welcome back to the sewing room on this, what for us is a very snowy, sleety, cold day. A great day to be indoors making a coat. So this is day 2 for me. I thought I'd start by just running through a few little things that occurred to me overnight. And first thing to say is that I've now laid out the other pieces from the lay plan, and I'll go through that in a second. There are some other pieces of pattern you'll have noticed that I haven't been through yet, and these are not cut in the main fabric. So you'll see on your lay plan in the pattern that it covers the fabric that you cut out in the main fabric. So, so there were some other pieces, and they're cut out in interface, and I'm just using this lightweight fusible interface here. That's the kind of thing you need. And then there's the piece for the buggy lining at the back, which just sort of covers the back bodice area of the coat. And I'm going to use one of these dress fabric scraps. I've got some lining scraps from other things because it's quite a small piece. I've got this dress fabric scrap which I quite like. It's spotty, I might use that, I'm going to decide. And then I've got this big piece of actual coat lining, but I'll decide which one of those to use. So that's what those other pieces are. Let's put them out of the way. So I just want to quickly mention a few things, and just to say again in case you've missed it, I have no affiliation with this company whatsoever, or any of the products I've used, and they don't know who I am. I'm just going through this pattern as I would make it, and in the hope that I will be useful to you. Got my notes here. I said yesterday in the first part of the video that I might make this on my treadle, and I was going to decide. I've decided I'm not going to, because it's actually quite enough for me to remember all of the bits of how to make this coat without complicating it by doing it on the treadle. And I will do a project on the treadle, but it'll be something very simple, and that will be a challenge for me to make it on the treadle machine. I also said I was going to decide about the finishing of the seams, which can be done in various ways. I will do some of it on my overlocker, and I'll do some of it with the pinking shears to demonstrate both. I think with this coat it won't matter that I'm mixing the two, so that's to say that. Another thing to say is, following me making this coat is no substitute for reading these instructions start to finish before you even buy your fabric. For instance, I'm making my back lining out of a piece of scrap lining I've got anyway. You can actually make your lining at the back with this fabric. You can make it in the main fabric, which is what I did in the check coat, in which case you'll need to buy more fabric, that kind of thing. There are various things that mentioned there, like seam allowance. Stick to the seam allowance. This is a mistake I made when I was first dressmaking. I didn't think the seam allowance mattered awfully, and I kind of winged it a bit with some disastrous results. Without going into too much detail, it affects the sizing much more than you would think. So if it says ½ an inch or whatever, stick to that, or a centimetre, stick to it. Make sure you keep measuring that seam allowance. Another thing to say is, from the pattern, is if you choose what size to make, and then that size is, make a note about that size. I ring it on the pattern which one I've made, and then also make sure not just going by the pattern you're going to keep, but whether you shortened it or lengthened it and that kind of thing for future reference. Yay, we've got a bit of sunshine. Treated myself to a new pair of dressmaking scissors yesterday. They were in the sale in my local shop. If you've watched my other videos where I do bag making and quilting and stuff, I don't use rotary cutters. One of the reasons is because they wear out too quickly and you can't sharpen a rotary blade. I'm not aware that you can anyway, and they're £7 each. So that's why I use scissors, because if you don't cut anything else out with them other than fabric, they will stay sharp for a very long time. That is why I always put a lot of people do this. Put a piece of fabric on like that to remind you never to cut anything apart from fabric with these scissors. Right, on with the pattern. So you remember from the beginning that I was winging it a bit as to the amount of fabric I was buying. So there's another thing to think about, which is my fabric doesn't have a right and a wrong side. It's because it's a woven fabric. If you're using a print, be very aware of what side you're cutting out. Most of the pieces are cut in pairs, so shape-wise they need to be a mirror image of each other. You also need to be very careful and make sure that the pattern is going to be on the right side. I can't really explain that any more than I have. I would be showing you with a pattern fabric and you'd know what I mean, but it's quite easy to get that wrong, particularly with the sleeves. So sleeves they have a front and a back. So when I first started doing dressmaking, obviously I've got no training at all, I thought sleeves were basically just a tube. They're not. They have a front and a back. So on most patterns, including this one, the back of the sleeve, by that I mean the back of the sleeve. So this bit is marked, that part is marked on the pattern by 2 notches. And this bit, the front bit, you know, the bit that you can see from the front of your coat, is marked with 1 notch. And that's why you cut a pair of the pieces. So for instance, this fabric doesn't have a right and wrong side. If it did, you would have to make sure that you cut them as a pair so that the print is on the right side. Don't get that wrong. So you remember me saying about I was winging it a bit with the fabric. I didn't quite know if I had enough. Fact is, I have got just enough. It's almost a miracle. And you do sometimes wonder about these things, don't you? Depending on what your beliefs are. But we searched high and low for fabric that was going to be suitable for this project. And just as we were about to give up, I found this roll at the bottom. And with a bit of help from my husband, and it's just been enough. So you'll remember me cutting out the other pieces first. Now I've slid the folded fabric up, onto the table, and obviously there's a little bit of room to play with that and the pockets, but you can't get away with. You can't do that in 2 halves, for instance, or anything like that. You just can't, and that is literally to the 1/8 of an inch. There's a space there, but underneath there's no. I'm right at the end of the fabric. The fold is not quite even. There's not 1/8 of an inch more than I need there. The only way I could have got around this, if this wasn't the case, would be if I was prepared to make the hem a bit shorter or make the coat a bit shorter. So this is why I need to be very careful about how much fabric you buy, and I've just about got away with it this time. So these are the last pieces that are cut out for me in the main fabric. So I'm now going to I'm going to stop whittering. I'm going to get on and cut them out. I hope you've enjoyed this first video, if you're just watching, but also if you are making it. I hope you're enjoying the process. So some people would say that the hardest part's now been completed, which is deciding what to make, deciding what fabric to use, buying it, preparing the fabric, cutting it out, and then doing any other preparation you need. I think that's the hardest bit. So in the next video, I'll be putting the fusible interface onto the bits that need it, and starting putting the coat together. So thanks for watching.